Hello student, you are welcome in the Economic IAS YouTube channel. Since today onward I am going to discuss some current Indian economic issues, and these issues are focused for preliminary 2027. This video and content of GS Economy is specifically prepared for those students who are again and again failed in preliminary examinations. They are unable to cross this preliminary, and for newcomers students who are going to be appear in preliminary 2027, a number of students are studying here and there in different institute, and they are teaching only the basic economics. This is something after assuming that you know basic fundamental economics like NCERT book, microeconomics, macroeconomics of 12th standard, Indian economy and data interpretation of 11th standard, and some extent you have the basic knowledge of Indian economy. You know students why you fail? Because you are unable to apply your knowledge in economics. Actually, when you further study the economics, which is needed, essential, very important for your preliminary, because in preliminary some questions are factual, some questions are analytical, and maximum questions which give you selection, they are analytical. Based your knowledge which you can apply in Indian economy. That's why if you really like to go through these examinations, then you should focus on my video. I will discuss certain other issues, analytical issues regarding complete Indian economy. And if you are interested for the basic economy classes and these kinds of upgraded quality Indian economic classes, then you can join us, the Economic IAS Institute, offline as well as online classes and test series for our GS economy as well as economics option. These lectures not only for general study but also for economics optional second paper as well as interview and your mains examinations. Yet I am going to focus completely preliminary, but if you have these kinds of knowledge, definitely it will boost up your knowledge and you can write a good essay also. Means it will contribute at multiple level. First, it will qualify you preliminary, definitely, because you know different sections of the GST general study, but GS economy have the major contributor in total general study paper, and maximum students always confusing regarding the Indian economy. They are unable to prepare the data exact focus area of the economy, which is asking repeatedly by the UPSC in your preliminary as well as mains, interview and essay paper. So let us start, student. Today I will focus pushing growth factors. As you know, growth means what? GDP growth rate. If you know about the basic information regarding what is GDP, what is GDP deflator, GNP, NNP, market price factor, cost, private income, personal income, disposable income, then definitely you can understand these topics: GDP, determinant, demand side factor, supply side factor. What is the role of aggregate supply? What is the role of aggregate demand in the determination of GDP? Then definitely you can understand my lecture. I would like to make it very simple, very interesting, by the help of theoretical aspects of Indian economy, which will boost up your knowledge, and definitely you can analyze the economics, you can think about the economics, you can do all the typical questions which are asking and away from the approach of a common students, and where the student failed in preliminary examinations. That's why I focus specifically some specific area of GS economy. 2025-26 financial year, and before 2025, since Donald Trump came in power in USA, world economic scenario became very fragile, uncertain. Geopolitics began to determine the overall GDP growth rate. till 2010, if you think about the global economy as well as Indian economy, the main determinant of GDP growth rate was your economic policies. But since 2010 onward, the main determinant of economic growth rate shift from economic policy to statecraft. You have to understand the difference between economic policy and economic statecraft. There are the two terminology. Prior to explain these two terminology, I will discuss this uncertainty in global economic environment because of tariff as well as reciprocal tariff. You know what is the tariff? I will explain this concept with the help of diagram so that you can understand what is actual factor which were reduce the global GDP growth rate during 2024, 25, 25, 26 and recent 2026, 27. That is because of geopolitical uncertainty in the environment. Priorly, America began to use tariff as a weapon and impose the tariff on its import from different trade partner countries. If you take the example of Indian economy, out of our total GDP, round about 21%. Keep in mind these data because this data is very important for you and understanding. Out of total GDP growth rate, 21% contributed by the foreign trade or export by the Indian economy. If America impose high tariff on Indian economy and as this country imposed, what happened? Our export, as you know, out of total export or total composition of Indian export, round about 7.2% largest shareholder is the America. Means out of total export trade, 7.2% out of total trade, 7.2% only with a single country, that is America. What does it mean? If America imposed the tariff on our economy, out of total GDP growth rate, 100%, 21% influenced by the trade, and out of 21%, out of total trade, 7.2% contributed by the America. It means our export growth rate also adversely affect the GDP growth rate. This is the data analysis, but you can very simply understand with the help of this analytical explanation. Suppose you can see this is say India, this is say USA. As our investment increases, increasing investment will increase the income, increase our import. This import increase what? The export of America, income of America, and import of America. This import also increase the export of India. Increasing export also increase the income of the India. It means if this USA impose tariff, then definitely you can see here our export which were priorly increased to America, they will begin to reduce and foreign trade multiplier effect will reduce our income. This growth rate or you can say GDP growth rate of Indian economy, growth rate of Indian economy adversely affected by this tariff policy. Actually, this tariff is what? That is economic statecraft of America. Now you are clear about the difference between economic statecraft and economic policies. Actually, America is using tariff as a weapon not only with India but also in case of other countries like China, Russia, who are the trade partner of someone other countries. If America also restrict on India not to import the cheap petrol, diesel and gas from Russia, and if we purchase they will impose the restrictions, furthermore tariff on India. That kinds of policy not only begin to reduce the Indian GDP growth rate, but also the growth rate of global economy. As I first point discuss here, that this statecraft economic strategy of America began to adversely affecting the global GDP growth rate. If you go through and classify the different countries, advanced economy, emerging, developing, affluent economy, less developed economy, then you will find out that the growth rate of advanced economy because of tariff policy of America during 2025, 26, 26, 27 and half of the 27, 20, 26, 27 is begin to adversely affect. All over the global GDP growth rate was round about 3% during 2024, 25 and 25, 26. It is because of American policy. One point is clear. Now you focus on the US economic growth rate, which is quite good in comparison to other countries. Why American economic growth rate during 2025-26, 2024-25 is better? Because it is only because of investment by the America in its artificial intelligence, information technology, software, semiconductor and new technologies. That kinds of investment in America begin to boost up the growth rate of America, but due to supply chain disruption at global level, inflationary problem is there in America. Higher unemployment problem in America means growth rate is increasing, but with a high level of unemployment. Now you are clear about the two scenario, global scenario and American scenario. Third point which you have to understand, after that I will discuss about deeply Indian economy questions, which is very important and interesting to understand for your coming preliminary as well as means etc. exams. Tariff. What's the tariff effect? If you take the example, suppose China and US. Suppose say this is China, reciprocal demand curve. This is USA, reciprocal demand curve. In beginning stage, the terms of trade in between two countries are this. What does it mean? This is say exportable of China. This is importable of China. Or you can say this is importable of USA and this is exportable of USA. Think if America imposed the high tariff rate on the import, means China's export. What happened in that case? In that case, the USA reciprocal demand curve will shift from USA to USA dash. And now the terms of trade will be determined at this level T dash, means this China will export less and import more. That will be the adverse effect when America imposed the more restrictions on import from China. What happened? This reciprocal demand curve will shift, that is China dash to this one. Now the condition is that China export will decline more sharply from previous level say x to x dash, but its import remaining constant or minutely reduced. Under this condition, the trade account always unfavorable for China. Now the China will use the reciprocal tariff policy, and that will shift this reciprocal tariff policy, the trade offer curve of China from this China dash, from this one to what? That. Ultimately USA trade offer curve, and now the trade in between two countries will decline. This declining trade in between the two countries will definitely reduce the global growth rate. That is why tariff, or you can say economic statecraft policy of the America, which like to gain in its foreign policy, foreign trade policy, and suppress to other nations, automatically adversely affecting the global GDP growth rate. Now you can understand this point with the help of reciprocal demand curve. In a clear picture, if I say you, suppose this is initially USA reciprocal demand curve, this is China reciprocal demand curve, these are the terms of trade, means this is the import of China. I represent only in term of China, import, and this is the export of China. By the export of this quantity, I am representing here, you can understand very easily. By the export of OX, China is going to import OM. But when America imposed the tariff on from the import on the import of China, what happened? US trade offer curve shift downward in this US, means now USA is capable to import more from China by exporting less quantity. By exporting this less quantity, this will better off USA and worse off China, because now the terms of trade shift in favor of USA and adverse in favor of China. You can very easily understand this. But if there is the reciprocal tariff imposed by the China, what it will do? It will also shift the China reciprocal demand curve, and which will minimize the trade. Now the China if imposed high, then what happened? This will be the China reciprocal demand curve. China. What happened? If China imposed the tariff on American import, then China will export more, import less. That will be better of China and worse of US. This is the explanation regarding the effect of reciprocal tariff on other countries. If you are unable to understand with the help of diagram, commonly try to understand in this way. Suppose USA, China, if tariff rate increased by America on the import of China, what will it do? it will adverse the terms of trade of China. Terms of trade means price of export upon price of import. And when it will adverse, if the price of export is decreasing, price of import is increasing, that means China terms of trade will adverse and terms of trade of USA will improve, means its price of export will increase, price of import will decrease, that will be better off the America. 1 point. But if there is the reciprocal tariff policy in between two countries, what it will do? It will have the two adverse effects. One, it will reduce the trade of both the countries. It will reduce the growth rate of both the countries. That is the effect of reciprocal tariff. You memorize, you try to understand. I emphasize this point. Now I will explain the further point, that is economic policies and economic statecraft. Economic policy, you know, very simple. Fiscal policy, monetary policy, tariff policy, etc. or subsidy policy, all these comes under the economic policies. Till 2010, these economic policies are going to be improve the economic conditions of a country. But nowadays, since 2010 onward, economic statecraft policy of the global countries are being used for the betterment of their economic interests as well as their foreign policies, foreign trade policies, as I discussed with respect of tariff policy of America. Now the next point, trends in domestic economy. That is very interesting topic for your understanding. As you know, student, if you go through the growth scenario of GDP, growth scenario, prior to explain this Indian economy, I would like to explain the two factor demand and supply, how they are going to determine demand and supply, how they are going to determine the growth rate of any country. If you focus a simple diagram, Keynesian economics, that is say aggregate supply, that is say aggregate demand, both are intersecting to each other, or you can take the Keynesian explanations or explanations of aggregate supply and aggregate demand very easily, which can give you, this is say aggregate supply, this is say aggregate demand, this is the growth rate of an economy. Suppose you like to increase this aggregate growth rate of GDP, what you can do? It can be increased only by aggregate demand if you increase your aggregate demand by any factor. As you know, aggregate demand depends on multiple factors, that is consumption and investment. There are the two major determinants of aggregate demand. If you increase either consumption or investment or both, consumption or investment, then definitely it will increase your GDP growth rate from OG to OG dash. Similarly, you can achieve this target without changing the aggregate demand. I again plot a diagram. Suppose this is aggregate supply, say this is aggregate demand, and say this is the growth rate. If you are increasing only on the aggregate supply from AS to AS dash, AS to AS dash, that can also improve your growth rate from previous level of OG to OG dash. This is because of supply side effect. It means there are the two main determinants of aggregate supply and aggregate demand of the GDP growth rate in an economy. Now you can understand this phenomena, and UPSC asking in preliminary as well as in your mains examinations during 2025-26, what are the major determinants of GDP growth rate of Indian economy? If I give you certain statistics, you can understand. First, I will explain the demand side factor. Private final consumption expenditure. As I discussed with you, in demand side consumption, investment and export. Consumption, investment and export are the three major determinants of demand. If our consumption is increasing, if our investment increasing, if our export increasing, then definitely aggregate demand will increase in our economy. That can boost up the growth rate of our economy. As you can take the example of 2025. In 2025, if you take only the consumption, the two main determinant of consumption, private final consumption expenditure, private final consumption expenditure, this is one. Another major consumption determinant, government final consumption expenditure, government final consumption expenditure. Now you are understanding, student? I am taking this very interesting topic and try to teach you what in actual sense economics. Superficial knowledge of economics can't provide you selection in your preliminary, in your mains, in your interview. Definitely you are needed that kinds of in-depth knowledge. Actually applied questions based on these questions. If you go through the data, if I explain you data, then you will see that in expenditure and demand side, our private final consumption expenditure as the percentage of our nominal GDP. Nominal GDP. It was during 2025 financial year. What is the 25 financial year? That is 2024 to 25. That is 2025 to 26. That is financial year 26. Now you are clear? In case of private final consumption expenditure during the 2025, it was 61.4% of nominal GDP. Nominal GDP. Government final consumption expenditure, it was only 10%, only 10% of nominal GDP. And actually these are the main determinant. If in preliminary they ask what are the main determinant, since 2012, or you can say if I take the data 2012 to 2025-26, private final consumption expenditure during 2025 was the highest, 61.4% of nominal GDP, and it was the main determinant or main driver of GDP growth rate during 2025. As it was, if you go through the statistics all over GDP growth rate during 2025, 6.5%. 6.5%, and the main determinant was private final consumption expenditure. If you take the two other aspects, that is investment and that is export, the contribution in GDP growth rate, as I told you, 61.4% by the private final consumption expenditure, 10% out of 100% nominal GDP growth rate, 10% contributed by the government final consumption expenditure, and third major dependent, that is gross fixed capital formation. As you know, this investment create gross fixed capital formation. Gross fixed capital formation determined by the investment in an economy. And if you see this data, it was during 2025 provisional estimate 29.9%. Means during 2025, our nominal GDP growth rate was 6.5%. Suppose it was 100%. In this 100%, 61.4% contributed by the private final consumption expenditure, 10% by the government final consumption expenditure, 29.9% by the investment, or you can say gross fixed capital formation in this growth rate. I will also discuss similar data in case of 2026 H1 or half 2026. Again, I will discuss these data. Export contribution was 21.2%. Rest of the 21.2%, our GDP growth rate of this one contributed by export growth rate. Now you can understand, if you focus all over the determinant of our GDP or nominal GDP growth rate, maximum contributor is the private final consumption expenditure. Second main determinant is the gross fixed capital formation, that is investment. And third main determinant was the export 21 and fourth one was the government final consumption expenditure. As you know, our government maintained this export growth rate. As you can see, during last year's our Prime Minister's strategy, he made a multiple free trade area agreement signed in different countries. He visited multiple countries and tried to motivate the other countries to export and import with India. BRICS strategy on behalf of Modi ji means our government were tried to counter the American statehood policy or American tariff rate policy countered by our Prime Minister. That is why, despite global economic growth rate during 2025-26 is very low, but India's growth rate highest in the world with 7.7% during the financial year 2026 and 25. This is because of our private final consumption expenditure. If I give you the statistics in case of H1 2026, H1 2026, or you can say that is the final H1 2026 or 2025-26. During this, in our demand side, two factor, private final consumption expenditure. In our growth rate during this half of the period was round about, I quote you the example, 7.9%. Our GDP growth rate, nominal GDP growth rate during this period was 8%. This is nominal GDP growth rate of Indian economy, 8% during H1 2026. Suppose you are assuming this 8%, 100% growth rate. Out of this 100% growth rate, how much contributed by our private final consumption expenditure? It was 61.4%. Now you are clear? Out of this 100% nominal GDP growth rate, 61.4% contributed by the private final consumption expenditure. Second, that is 9.6%. 9.6% government final consumption expenditure, 9.6% out of this 100%. Third, investment, gross fixed capital formation, that is contributing. It is because of Government of India capital expenditure policy, as I priorly code you 2026-27. Our government determined 12.2 lakh crore rupees capital expenditure. In previous year, it was round about lakh crore rupees capital expenditure. Investment gross fixed capital formation during this period 29.9%, and rest of the export contribution during this period was it was exactly 30.5%. 30.5%, and export contribution was 21.2%. 21.2%. Now you are clear. During the half of the 26, our GDP growth rate was 8%. Suppose you assume 100%, maximally contributed by the private final consumption expenditure 61.4%. Second determinant was gross fixed capital formation 30.5%. Third major determinant was export 21.2%, and fourth one in demand side 9.6%. In this way, today I explain you how our GDP growth rate determined by the demand side, four factors are responsible. That is, if I summarize that one, there are the three factors: consumption, investment, and export. In consumption, there are the two major determinants: private final consumption expenditure. Second is government final consumption expenditure. Second, investment, which determine gross capital formation. That is the one major determinant of our GDP growth rate on demand side. And third, that is export, also a major determinant of demand side growth rate. Tomorrow I will discuss the supply side factor. If you are somewhere confusion, you can ask me. I try to elaborate the real economics. If you are clear about the fundamental economics, as I told you, NCERT book, Indian economy, macroeconomics, and if you are interested to go through this book, you can join my online classes, as well as for civil service advanced studies, or I would like to say this is focus study for pre-mains interview essay in GS economy on behalf of the economic IAS. You can join these classes. Thank you, student, for today listening this lecture. I will again prepare and explain you tomorrow the supply side current issues, and I will also discuss the day-to-day newspaper issues, which is very helpful for you in your pre-mains, etc. Thank you, student.